السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين، يا خاتم النبيين، يا شفيع المذنبين، يا أنيس الغريبين، يا رحمة للعالمين. So, last week, we'll continue with Ahlul Bayt, and as I've said, this will continue on for quite a while. Last week we covered aspects of Uhud that were connected directly to Ahlul Bayt, and we mentioned the birth of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, which took place exactly 1 month before the Battle of Uhud. And the following year, basically a month, so his birth, Imam Hassan was born 15th of Ramadan. But the next year, actually 11 months or 10 and a half months later, Imam Hussein al-Islam was born on the 13th of Shaban. I mean the 3rd of Shaban, not 13th, but the 3rd of Shaban. And so the two of them, when you listen to the stories or the incidences that occurred in their youths, they overlap. And you have a very difficult time telling the difference between the two. Physically, they were different because physically, Imam Hassan al-Islam was a exact copy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from his waist up, and Imam Hussein al-Islam, his lower part of his body was an exact copy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which, when we talk about them later, will make a lot of sense as to why this split this way. And just to kind of to allude to that a little bit, go ahead, and that way you can be thinking about this, is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Tanzuru, that He says that if you help Allah, Allah will help you. And then He says, وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ إِن تَنْصُرُوا اللَّهَ وَيَنْصُرُكُمْ وَيُثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ. That help Allah and Allah will help you by, and a lot of people say, and make your feet firm. And the reality of it is, He will help you by making your feet firm, so that in the face of adversity you don't move. You stand steadfast in the face of adversity. And we see this, in Karbala, where the feet of Imam Hussein al-Islam are firm in what he needs to do. No wavering this way or that way. But coming back, to the two of them, there was an incident once where, the two of them, they wrote something. And, we've talked about this a little bit before, but, you have that brotherly competition. And so they each wrote something, and they wanted to know whose writing was better, whose handwriting was better. And so they came running to their mother, Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha, and they asked her, whose writing is better. And she thinks that, her thought process is that, if I say that, one of theirs is better, then that will hurt the feeling of the other. And she's not willing to hurt any of the feelings of either one of them. And so she says to them, she says, go ask your father. So they go and ask Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh. And they ask him the same question, whose writing is better? And so his thought process is exactly the same. And if I say one over the other, then it's going to hurt the feelings of the other. And he's not willing to do that. So he says, go ask your mother. And they say, well, she's the one who sent us to you. So he says, well, then go ask Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when they come to him, they pose the same question to him. And he, of course, the same process. He's not willing to hurt the feelings of either one of them. And so he says that, let's ask Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Jibreel alayhi salam with 7 pearls from Jannah. And Jibreel alayhi salam says that, we will throw these up. And whosever side that they land on, if more land on the side of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his writing is better. If more land on the side of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, his writing is better. So that's how this will be decided. Sort of like casting lots. And so when he does this, 7 pearls go up. 3 of them land on the side of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, 3 of them land on the side of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and 1 of them breaks in half, and half of it lands here and half of it lands there. So, so that no one's feelings are hurt. And this also, is sad that, today there are people who try, because they have to defend Yazid somehow. They try to show that the decision of Imam Hassan alayhi salam to hand over the rule, of course, according to them, they say, oh, he handed over the Khilafah, which is not true, because there was no Khilafah left, because it was 30 years were already up. So they tried to show that his decision was better than that of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, which of course is ludicrous, and especially when you look at the situations, you're talking about 2 very different situations. But these are things again that we'll be coming back to periodically. But as I said, when we look at their births, they're also very similar. So 15th of Ramadan, 3rd year of Hijri, 15th of Ramadan, 3rd year of Hijri, Imam Hassan alayhi salam is born. 3rd of Shaban, 4th year of Hijri, Imam Hussein alayhi salam is born. And before the birth of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the aunt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Fadl radiallahu anha, who is the wife of his uncle Abbas radiallahu anha. So she sees this dream. And the next morning she comes running to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because she's very upset, because she thinks that it's something bad. And she says, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I saw this dream that frightened me, and upset me very much. So he said, what did you see? And she says that I saw that a piece of you was cut off and it landed in my lap. And so he says that this isn't a bad dream, this is a good dream. This means that in the house of Fatima, salamullah alayha, a son will be born, and you will be the first to hold him. And exactly as that, she was actually one of the midwives there when he was born, and she was the first to hold him. And when she held him, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he entered the house, she was holding him, and he said to her, he said, give me my son. And she says to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I have not cleaned him yet. And he says that, do you think that the water of this world can clean this child? He is already pure. So give me my son. There's so many things that come out of this. And we're going to be coming back to a lot of these things, kind of jumping around back and forth a little bit. But here also, as in the case of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, the first nourishment that Imam Hussein alayhi salam receives in this world is the saliva of Rasulullah, the blessed saliva of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, directly from the tongue of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, and we can't even imagine the knowledge and the eloquence that is being transferred at that moment. And so, you know, both of them receive this nourishment, physical and spiritual. Both of them are raised in the house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the other aspects of this is that in the case, I'm not sure about the case of Imam Hassan al-Islam, but in the case of Imam Hussein al-Islam, Imam Hussein al-Islam was born after the Dhuhr. So Bibi Fatima salamullah alayhi had made Dhuhr Salat, and then he is born. And then when the time for Asr came, she stood up for Asr Salat and made her Salat. And when some of the women asked her about this, she says, because the normal thing is that after birth, the women are impure for 40 days. And so there's no salat on them. They can't make salat. And she says that this is not for us. This is not for her. This is for, the rest of the ummah. And this gets back to the verse, of Surah Ahzab, and that's the one that I asked everybody to look at last week, which is Surah Ahzab, which is Surah number 33, and the verse is also verse number 33. So, and I wanted to cover this, and then we'll come back to them in a minute, or in a few minutes, inshallah. When you look at verse number 33, it starts off with وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, addressing the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so addressing their wives, or addressing the wives of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mother of the believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off with the verse, and he says, "Stay quietly in your houses and make not a dazzling display like that of the former times of ignorance, and establish regular prayers and give zakat and obey Allah and His Messenger." And Allah only wishes, and then now, the next part of the verse is إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. And Allah only wishes, or rather it should be Allah only intends to remove all abomination from you, O members of the household, and make you pure and spotless, perfect purification. Now the next verse, which is verse number 34, which starts off with وَاذْكُرْنَا, it says, "And recite what is rehearsed to you in your homes of the signs of Allah and His wisdom, for Allah is all subtle and aware." Okay. When we read the Quran, a couple of things to understand here. One is, which is a point that I'm going to come back to in a little while, is that the Quran, the reality of the Quran is that it's a conversation between Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then through him to the rest of us. Okay, so that's one. The other aspect of the Quran, though, is in understanding the Quran, you have to look at the context of the verses. Okay. And that's, in general, that's one of the most important things to understand the Quran, is the context. So if I simply look at the context without knowing anything else, then the first part of verse number 33 addresses the wives of Rasulullah directly. And then verse 34 addresses the wives of Rasulullah again. Okay. So simply not knowing anything else, then I would think that this part, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهَ لِيُذْهِرَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ, that it is only Allah's intention to remove all filth, is also addressing the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, in understanding conversation, we also understand that sometimes in a conversation, subject matters can shift very quickly, and then come back to what was talked about before. This is the nature of conversation, and this is what has happened here. Because this verse, or rather these verses, every verse of the Quran has its shan nuzul, which means that, why the background to why it was revealed. So when was it revealed? Was it Makki or Madani? That changes the meaning. Where was it revealed? What were the conditions of the revelation? For whom it was revealed? All of these things change the meaning, or can change the meaning of a verse, or our understanding of the verse. And so in this one here, when you have an explanation of the Quran from the one upon whom the Quran was revealed, there's no better explanation than that. So with these verses, we have that explanation. Because when these verses were revealed, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we've talked about this before, but I'm re-emphasizing this right now. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the house of Bibi Salma, the mother of the believers, his wife, Bibi Salma radiallahu anha. And this is again the same wife that sand of Karbala was given to, which later on became blood when Imam Hussein al-Islam was martyred. When the verse is revealed, he calls for 4 people: Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein alayhimus salam. So he calls for these 4, and when they arrive, he says to them, that Allah has sent a gift for you. And he recites this part of the verse, and he takes them underneath his cloak, his kissa. He takes them underneath the cloak, and he says, Allahumma ha'ulahi ahli. Oh Allah, these are my household. So he himself is defining who this is referring to. When he does this, when he takes them under his cloak, his wife, Bibi Salma radiallahu anha, she also wants to enter that. And when she attempts to get in, he holds her back. He motions her back, and he says, "This is not for you. You have been given much good. You're fine where you are. You've given this is something separate." So again, he separates this part of the household from the rest of the household. Okay? Now, having said that, there are people, people who expose themselves because having animosity or issues with the household is a sign of hypocrisy. Okay? So they have to come up with different explanations because it doesn't fit their agenda. So one claim is that, oh no, see, he was simply including them in this these 4 in the purification, because they had some shortcomings, so he was washing those away, and she didn't need that. This is their explanation, or one of their explanations. The problem with that explanation is that he himself is underneath that cloak. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is underneath that cloak with these 4. So what shortcomings did he have? That's the okay. So so all of these attempts, and there are multiple things that people will say, all of those attempts fail when you start really weighing it through this. And again, this is the one upon whom the Quran is being revealed, who himself is the walking, living, talking Quran, who himself is the explanation, the bayan of the Quran, is telling us that this is for them, that this is for these, that this is for this Ahlul Bayt, the Ahl Kisa, the one taken underneath the cloak. These are the ones that this part of the verse is specifically talking about. And so when they are pure, and then so many things, like when Imam Hussein al-Islam is born, what does he say? He said, do you think that the water of this world is pure? He's already pure. Allah has made him pure. Give me my son. Right? He doesn't need to be cleaned before, he's held by the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in that condition, he gives his tongue to him so that he receives the spiritual and physical nourishment. So, again, this is talking about them, and there are other aspects of the Quran where we see this similar shift. So if this was the only place where you have this shift, then you could say, oh, this is something that somebody's trying to force an explanation into. But we see in Surah Naml, which is Surah number 27, the ant, talking about Sulaiman al-Islam. Okay, and when the hudhud, what they translated as hoopy, whatever that is, with that bird, the hudhud, didn't come, and we know the story. It didn't show up. So Sulaiman al-Islam says that where is he? If he doesn't come, and if he doesn't have a good explanation, I will kill him. And he comes and he tells, oh, I was in such and such a place, and I saw these people worshiping the sun, and they have this queen and all this power and all this authority and all this other stuff, and he explains to them. Even in that explanation, we see where there's a shift from what he's saying and then what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Even though if you read a lot of the translations, they include that all in the saying of the hudhud, which is not. But also, like here in verse number 34, when Bilqis, or the Queen of Sheba, when she consults her advisors and asks them for advice, and she asked, what should they do? And then she says, because Sulaiman al-Islam sends this letter to her, asking her to come. And if she doesn't come, then he will come, right? And she said, kings, when they enter a country, despoil it. They destroy it. And make the noblest of its people the lowest. And even in this translation, he says, thus do they behave. He includes that as part of the saying of Bilqis. But Abdullah ibn Abbas says that this last part of the verse is not the saying of Bilqis. This is affirmation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about what she has said. So again, you see that shift. Okay? So, the same way in Surah Ahzab, verse number 33, we see that shift. And we see this purification. And so, the other aspect of this is that when Sulaiman al-Islam, when Fadl, when she says that I saw a part of you being cut off to Rasulullah and landing in my lap. The offspring are a part of you. Your offspring are a part of you. And this is also affirmed in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, Quraysh making these goddesses. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says that they have made parts of Allah. Right? So, these offspring, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam, they are literally parts of Rasulullah, as is be Fatima salamullah alayha. And this is why Imam Malik rahmatullah alayhi, he said, I can't place anyone above her. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Badatu minni. He says, Badatu minni. She is a part of me. So how can I give preference to anyone over a part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So again, when we look at these, this aspect of the household, because you have different aspects of the household. You have that aspect of the household, which is, like Banu Hashim. You have that upon who the zakat is forbidden. You have that aspect of the household, which includes the wives. But when we are talking about Ahlul Bayt, specifically, we're talking about these four plus Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so the five. Okay. So again, so we have the births of these two, third Hijri and then fourth Hijri. The other thing that happened in the fourth year of Hijri, which is another point that I'm going to come back to, because I want to go, get to parts of the Battle of Khandaq, which will all tie a lot of this back together, is the passing of the aunt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mother of Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh, the wife of Hazrat Abu Talib radiallahu anha, Bibi Fatima bint Asad radiallahu anha. And so when she passes, that fourth year of Hijrah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after they dug her grave, he goes into her grave. And he lays down in her grave and moves from side to side. And then he comes out. And the companions, they say to him, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have seen you do something that we've never seen you do before. And you know what we've dug is adequate. So why did you do this? So he says that this is the woman who did not allow me to miss the love of my mother. When we look at her history, when Islam came, and the first 3 years of propagation, as we know, were the secret years of propagation. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's propagating, but only to those who are very, very close. So those who, they're not just close like because they're related, but they're close because they're also, very inclined toward doing what he wants them to do. And so, and of course, the Muslims, they would meet in Darul Nadwa, which was, or Darul Arqam, not Darul Nadwa, Darul Arqam, the house of Arqam. Arqam radiallahu anhu was one of the early companions from Banu Makhzum, whose house was very close to the Kaaba. And they would meet there secretly, which was interesting because you had the enemies of Islam meeting basically next door, almost. And he's literally sitting underneath their noses, and they don't know what's going on. Okay. So they would meet there. And so one day, she wanted to go and see him. We talked about before, he's in her household from the age of 8. She would not allow her own children to eat until he had come. And she would give him the first bread. She would feed him with all the rest of the children. And then after everyone had eaten, they would leave, and then she would feed him separately. And when he asked her, why do you do this, she said that first I fed you as your aunt, and now I'm feeding you as your mother. So one day, this is years later, she wanted to come and see him because every day he would come to her house, but now she wanted to go and see him. So she set out and she found out, from her son Jafar where he was. And they went, when they enter the house, Jafar has not yet accepted Islam. He doesn't even really know about Islam yet. Because again, Rasulullah isn't preaching openly yet. They enter the house, and Rasulullah is getting ready to lead the few people that are there in Salat. And Jafar, when he enters and he sees this scene, he looks toward his mother. What do I do? This is the older brother of Ali. Ali, of course, was the youngest of the sons. And so he looks at his mother, and she says, "Follow him, for he will never lead you astray." Do what he says. Do what he wants you to do. So again, when we see this now, she made the hijrah, she passed in the 4th year of the hijrah, and when they're burying her, Rasulullah does this, And he says, when they ask him, why did you do this? He said, this is the woman who did not allow me to miss the love of my mother, and I have touched, my body has touched her grave, so that there will be no difficulty for her, no, not even the least bit of discomfort for her in the grave. Because as we know, the grave squeezes everybody. Believer, non-believer, good or bad, it squeezes them. And of course, there is a difference though in the squeezing. For the disbelievers, the squeezing is because it's upset and it's wrath, the earth's wrath against them, because they walked on the earth with arrogance or in denial of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For the believer, it's like the mother when she sees her child and just that she just wants to hug him. And so it's that squeeze, but it's still uncomfortable for the child. Right? So for her, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that she won't even experience that discomfort because his body has touched that grave. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now we come to the 5th year and the Battle of Khandaq. And so during this, 3rd and 4th year, 3rd year of course is Uhud, and then after Uhud, basically 2 years. It's not calm, but they were constantly dealing with smaller groups and smaller issues, smaller tribes trying to attack them and all of these other things. And so you have Banu Mustalaq and you have all these other things that happen in between, and various other aspects. But I want to kind of cover aspects of Khandaq first. So Khandaq, as we know, is the Battle of the Trench, also known as Ahzab, the Battle of the Confederates, or the Coalition rather, would be the more appropriate translation. So this is where all of the Arabia, the leaders of Banu Nadir, who were one of the Jewish tribes that were exiled from Medina Munawwara, Huyay bin Akhtab, he basically came to the Quraysh and said to them, look, why don't we put an end to this so we can gather all of the tribes and come at them all at once. Quraysh were suspicious that maybe they'll back out, so they said, if you really want to show us that you're sincere, then we want you to bow to our idols. And they said, no problem. So they basically go around getting this coalition together. Quraysh made up about a third of that coalition. They were going to have 10,000 man army coming against the Muslims in Medina Munawwara, which is a massive army in Arabia. That was the biggest army that had been gathered at that point in Arabia. Another large nomadic Najdi tribe called Ghatafan, they would make up another significant portion of this coalition. So together you would have these two, Quraysh and Ghatafan, would basically make up about half of the coalition. And then you'd have other smaller clans and tribes that came in. So, and then Banu Nadir and some other tribes as well. So you're going to have roughly about 10,000 men coming against the Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course, word reaches Medina Munawwara. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam starts the preparations, and of course this is where Salman radiallahu anhu, we're not going to go into his history, but this was basically the first major battle that he's able to take part in, because he'd been a slave in Uhud and Badr, so he couldn't take part in Uhud because the person that was his slave master was non-Muslim and wouldn't allow him to join the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then of course Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam eventually freed him. We've talked about that before, his freeing, but he is the one who gave the advice of digging the trench. And as we talked about, the trench was dug in about 18 days. It was roughly 3 miles long, 20 feet deep, and 30 feet across. We've talked about we talked recently about that large stone that they came across, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one who broke that stone, and of course giving the glad tidings of defeating Persia and Rome, or Rome and Persia and Yemen, which also is interesting, as we've talked about, because this is a moment when it's like, this is the end of the Muslims. Okay. And he's giving these glad, oh, you're going to conquer, Rome and Persia, I mean, the superpowers. So anyway, when the coalition comes, and they want to, attack the city, now they see this huge trench, and it's like, oh, what do we do? Now they're stuck. Okay. You do have some significant fighting that goes on during this, and part of that is, basically volleys of arrows being thrown. There was one day where the fighting was very, very intense, and there are other aspects to all of this, but I want to focus on Ahlul Bayt, and specifically more so on Sayyidina Ali, karamallahu wajh. Because Imam Hassan al-Islam at this time now is 2, and Imam Hussein al-Islam is 1. The Battle of Khandaq takes place in Shawwal of the 5th year of Hijri. So basically exactly 2 years after Uhud. And the siege lasts for about a month, until eventually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sends the wind and stuff, and they can't even light a fire, and so they finally get demoralized and they leave. But during the battle, or during the days of the fighting, one of the persons who is able to break across is Amr bin Abdul. Okay. So Amr is this warrior of Quraysh, undefeated in 60 battles. He's the guy that I kind of look at, when I think of him, I think of the old kung fu master that beats up everybody. The old guy who no one can stand against. Yeah. So that's Amr. Okay. He is old, but he's also still very physically strong. Wields his weapons, with a lot of skill. He's also very smart, because he came in the Battle of Badr, but he did not fight in Badr. He saw the situation. He himself was wounded beforehand. He was healing, tending to some wounds, some older wounds, so he didn't fight. But he saw what happened. So he is basically, essentially, the one that comes across. And when he comes across, he starts challenging, sarcastically challenging the Muslims, saying, who is it who wants to go to Jannah? Come on, let me send you to Jannah. Who wants to go to Jannah? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in his tent with some of the other companions. When he is crossed, and now he's shouting in the middle of the streets of Medina Munawwara, who wants to enter Jannah? I'm here. So when he calls this out, Ali, of course, Ali is Ali. So Ali, he stands up, ready to go. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Ya Ali, this is Amr. I know. Let me, he requests permission, please let me go. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam places his turban on the head of Ali. And of course he has in his hand Zulfiqar, which in reality, as we've talked about before, is really the sword of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be wielded by Ali. So he comes, so Ali then goes with the permission and the blessings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he also knows, it doesn't matter now. no one can defeat him because of whose blessings he's received. So he comes in front of Amr. Amr is on his horse. And he says to Amr, he says that I accept your challenge. So he asks him, he says, who are you? Amr asks Ali, and he says, who are you?
Mustafa, Kentucky, too.
He says that, he says, Ali. So he says, Ali who? He says, Ali, Amr says, Ali bin Uthman. He says, no, Ali bin Abi Talib. So he says to him, he says, look, I don't want to fight you because of a favor that your father did to me. And this is a point I want to come back to in a little while. Because simply the name of Abu Talib amongst the Quraysh was so respected, and he had done so many people so many favors, including Amr. He says, look, I don't want to fight you. You're the son of Abu Talib, and he did so many favors to me, and I owed him so much, so I don't want to fight you. So Ali, he says to him, he says, look, he says, I've heard that if anyone makes 3 requests of you, you will at least fulfill one of them. He said, yes, that's true. He says, then fine. Then I request that you go back. Leave. No, actually, first, no, that was second request. First request, he said, I request that you become Muslim. I invite you to Islam. He says, I can't do that because what will people think? This issue of what will people think.
Yep.
Like, that's kept so many people from the truth of, what will people think? And the interesting thing is that those same people will stab you in the back the first moment they get, that you're worried about what they're going to think. Who cares what they think? You need to worry about what your Lord thinks, or rather what your Lord considers of you, rather. I don't like using that word for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what He considers of you. So he said, what will people think? If I become Muslim, I don't want to become Muslim. He says, fine. He says, my second request is that you leave. Don't fight. Leave. He said the same thing. If I leave, then people will think I'm a coward. I left because I was scared. I'm not going. No. He says, then fine. He says, then the third request is that you fight me. You have no other choice now. You have to accept one of the 3. So he says, the third request is you fight. He said, fine, then I will fight you. So now Amr, he says to Ali, he says, you strike first. Ali says, look, if I strike first, there won't be anybody left to strike second. Of course, gets his blood boiling. He says, I am Amr. I'm that great warrior everybody fears. They think of my name and they have to run to the bathroom or whatever else they do. So Amr attacks, and Ali catches his blow on his shield, and it indents the shield. That's how hard of the blow that was. And they're moving around, and all this dust is flying. This is the desert. It's dry. All this dust is flying, and no one can see inside. From the outside, no one can see what's going on. And then all they hear is Allahu Akbar, and then the dust settles. So the dust settles, and now all you see is Amr in 2 parts. And you see Zulfiqar, the sword of Sayyidina Ali Karamallah, just stuck in a stone underneath. That mark where that sword was stuck, I know was still there in the early 1970s. I don't know if what they've done, because they've destroyed so many things. So if is that one of those things that was destroyed, in all of this so-called construction that they're doing? or what, but I know that in the 70s you could still see that mark in that stone. It was a small stone underneath where they were standing, and he came down and he chopped him in two. And the man falls, and you have to understand he's chopping in two, and the man is wearing armor. When we cut goats and sheep and cows, I mean, hacking away and not getting anywhere. And this is Ali, and Ali is Ali, right? So he comes down and just, that's it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, when Ali radhan was leaving, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that kullu iman, all of faith is going to fight all of disbelief. Kullu kufr. So Ali radhan is the embodiment of iman, and Amr was the representative of disbelief. And then after this, of course, when they hear Allahu Akbar, now all of the believers are saying Allahu Akbar. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that this one strike of Ali, this one strike of Ali, if it was placed in the mizan, in the scales, would be heavier than all of the good deeds of the entire ummah, if they were all placed in the other side of the scale. This one strike of Ali would be heavier than everything else. So, and this is why, again, after Khandaq, Jibreel al-Islam, he comes and he says, La fata illa Ali, la sayfa illa dhul fiqar. That there is no youth except Ali, and there is no sword except dhul fiqar. One of the points I wanted to come back to here is, as we talked about, or as I said, when Amr finds out that Ali, this is the Ali, the son of Abu Talib, he says what? He says, I don't want to fight because of the favor that your father did to me. So this kind of gets back to the propaganda that developed and really got pushed during the time of Banu Abbas, that the father of Ali is kafir. Hazrat Abu Talib, he died in disbelief, is what the claim is. And this started basically because Banu Abbas, when they would talk to the descendants of Fatima, salamullah alayha, who were the descendants of Ali, they would say, oh, you're the sons of kafir. Because they wanted to show their own superiority over them, the true household. Oh, you're the sons of kafir. Okay. And so we see the hadith in Sahih Bukhari. Because again, you have all of this governmental pressure when these books are being written, so you have to take this into mind. The narrator of the hadith is Sayyid bin Musayyib, radiallahu anhu, who did not become Muslim until after Fatih Makkah. And who is not even a witness to what he's narrating. He's narrating from his father, Musayyib. And the narration is that, that during the last days, or the last moments of the life of Hazrat Abu Talib, the Quraysh leaders, they come to him, including Abu Jahl and Musayyib, and they go to him and they say, look, this issue between us and your nephew, you're about to die, so why don't you settle it before you go? And he says, fine. So they call for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes and he said, so Hazrat Abu Talib, addressing his nephew, he says that this is what your people are saying, so why don't you come to some agreement? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the only agreement that we can come to is that if they accept Islam, they accept La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if they do that, then, you know, there's no issue. And short of that, there is no settlement. There is no compromise. And I request you to say the same thing. Now, if I look at even the wording in this hadith, Hazrat Abu Talib, he says that if it was not for the fear of what your people would do to you after me, what these people would do to you after me, then I would have said what you wanted me to say. But I die on the faith of my father, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. He doesn't say, he doesn't simply throw it out that I die on the faith of my forefathers. That could be made as a general statement. No, he specifies, I die on the faith of Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. Okay. So, you know, when I analyze this without knowing anything else, here I have a man who is willing, and again, not knowing anything else, who is willing to go to the fire simply for the protection of Rasulullah. What better iman can you have than that? You know, like we talked about in Jummah, Ibrahim al-Islam is willing to be thrown into the fire simply because he knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with him. Here, Hazrat Abu Talib says, you know, if I say what you want me to say right now in front of these people, then any protection that you gain from my name will be gone. Just like Hazrat Hamza radiallahu anhu, after he became Muslim, he couldn't defend Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam anymore because now he was one of them. Oh, you're one of them. Now we can do whatever we want to you as well. You know, before that, if they did anything to him, then the other people of Quraysh, oh, he's one of us, what are you doing? Same thing with Hazrat Abu Talib. If he openly declares his iman, oh, he's one of them. Now, you know, open season. And his name now no longer affords any protection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because in Quraysh, you know, in that tribal society, it was all about protection. Who's your protector, right? So again, he says, if it was not for the fear of what these people would do to you after me, I'm not going to say this. All right. But he says it because he says, but I die on the faith of my father, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib. What was the faith of his father? Okay, of course, we know his father passed away when Rasulullah was 8. But what would he do? He would take Rasulullah to the big meetings and have him sit in his place when he's a young boy. And when they would say anything against him, they would say, no, this son of mine has a great future. Don't say anything against him. So he himself knows, because he was one of those who held that light. So if I accept the hadith, even if I accept the hadith as it is, as it stands, it still doesn't say what you make it say. It actually affirms to me the iman of Abu Talib. Now here you have a man who, again, who's willing to do anything for the protection of Rasulullah, for the love of Rasulullah. What else is iman other than that? But you know, if I look at it from a different perspective, it doesn't make any sense for Abu Jahl and Musayyib and all these other people to be there at the time that he's passing, because you know, they did not get along at all. Hazrat Abu Talib and Abu Jahl did not get along at all because of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, when you're dying, you're not going to let, you know, the people that you despise come close to you. And again, this is a narration from Sa'id bin Musayyib. He's narrating from his father, so he wasn't even there, you know, and neither he or his father were Muslim at the time. The other aspect of that is there is another narration which talks about Abbas radiallahu being there, which makes sense because he's his brother. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to him, say this, there's a pause, and he moves his lips, and Abbas puts his ears close to him, and he says that that he is saying, "Oh, my nephew, be happy," because he's saying what you want him to say. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that I didn't hear anything. Why does he say I didn't hear anything? Because if he affirms it, now Quraysh will be attacking him again. So there's a lot, so this is the propaganda that Banu Abbas used against the household of Rasulullah, the progeny of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh, you're the sons of kafir. So they bring this up. The other aspect of this is also in the Quran. Alam yajidka yatiman fa'awa. Surah Ad-Duha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Did we not find you orphaned and we gave you shelter? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we gave you shelter. Allah gave him shelter. Right? Whose house did he give him shelter in? The house of Abu Talib. So he's referring to the action of Abu Talib. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally in this verse is referring to the action of Abu Talib as his own action. Again, shows us this honored position of Hazrat Abu Talib. So there I kind of went forward and then backwards. But there were aspects that needed to be covered. Any questions? Everyone's good? Inshallah. So I guess we'll go ahead and end here today, inshallah. And then the siege of Khandaq, like I said, it lasted basically about a month. Basically the month of Shawwal, most of the month of Shawwal. So right after Ramadan, which is interesting because most of the preparations for Khandaq were being made in Ramadan. So, they were working hard while they were still fasting. So inshallah, we'll kind of continue on next week with other aspects. But the point to remember here today was, all of Iman going against all of Kufr. And that one strike of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, outweighing the deed, all of the deeds of all of the rest of the Ummah, the entire Ummah. So, inshallah, we'll continue from here next week, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand. And the only way to understand is love. So may He give us that love of Rasulullah, of Himself and of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These aren't two mutually exclusive things. This is one and the same. You cannot love one without loving the other. It's an impossibility. Just like we cannot love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam without loving his Ahlul Bayt. Again, that's an impossibility. So someone who claims to love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam but then has issues with Ahlul Bayt, that's just a false claim. And also his companions and all of those whom they love, inshallah. So Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala Sayyidina. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.